I was sitting in the church pew watching my beautiful 24-year-old granddaughter Jessica rehearse walking down the aisle toward her fiancé Brandon when a woman I'd never seen before burst through the church doors screaming, "Stop this wedding. That man is already married to me. We have 2 children together, and he's been lying to all of you for the past year." The entire church went silent. Jessica froze halfway down the aisle, her face going white. And Brandon, the man we'd all welcomed into our family, the man who'd seemed so perfect and loving and devoted, turned around with an expression that told me everything I needed to know before he even opened his mouth. This woman was telling the truth, and my granddaughter's fairy tale was actually a nightmare. And I had less than 24 hours before the wedding to decide whether to let Jessica marry a man who'd lied about everything or destroy her happiness by exposing the truth she wasn't ready to hear. My name is Patricia Morgan. I'm 69 years old, and I need to tell you about the worst 24 hours of my life, about how I discovered that my granddaughter was about to marry a con artist, about the impossible choice I faced between protecting her from heartbreak and allowing her to make a catastrophic mistake, and about how sometimes loving someone means breaking their heart to save their life. Let me take you back 18 months so you understand how we got to that terrible moment in the church, so you know who Jessica was before Brandon and why what happened next was so devastating for all of us. Jessica is my oldest daughter, Sarah's only child, and she's been the light of my life since the day she was born. Her father left when she was 3 years old, just walked out one day and never came back. And Sarah raised Jessica alone, working 2 jobs to give her daughter everything she needed. I helped as much as I could, watching Jessica after school, helping with homework, being there for every school play and soccer game and milestone that her father missed. Jessica grew up to be a kind, trusting, optimistic young woman who believed in fairy tales and true love, despite having a father who abandoned her. Jessica graduated from college with a nursing degree 2 years ago and got a job at the county hospital, and she threw herself into her work, taking care of patients with such compassion and dedication that everyone who met her loved her. But she was lonely. She wanted love, wanted marriage and children and the family she'd never really had growing up. And she'd been through a string of disappointing relationships with men who didn't appreciate her, who took advantage of her kindness, who broke her heart over and over. Then, 16 months ago, Jessica met Brandon at a hospital fundraiser. He was 32 years old, handsome and charming, worked as a pharmaceutical sales representative, drove a nice car, wore expensive suits, and he swept Jessica off her feet from their very first conversation. He told her she was beautiful, told her he'd been looking for someone like her his whole life, told her he wanted to settle down and start a family. And Jessica, sweet, trusting Jessica, believed every word. Within 3 months, Brandon had proposed. He took Jessica to a fancy restaurant, got down on one knee with a beautiful diamond ring, and asked her to marry him. And she said yes without hesitation. Sarah was concerned about how fast things were moving. She told Jessica to slow down, to take more time to get to know Brandon, but Jessica was so happy, so in love, so convinced she'd finally found her person that she wouldn't listen. She said, "Mom, when you know, and I know Brandon is the one. I'm not letting him get away." I met Brandon for the first time at the engagement party, and I'll be honest, something about him bothered me from the start. He was too smooth, too rehearsed, like every word and gesture had been practiced. When he talked about his past, his stories seemed vague and inconsistent. He said his parents were dead, that he was an only child, that he'd moved to our state from California 2 years ago for work. But when I asked specific questions about where in California or what brought him here specifically, his answers were evasive. He said he'd been engaged once before, but his fiancée had died in a car accident, which explained why he was so eager to find love again. But something about the way he told that story felt performative, like he was saying what he thought we wanted to hear. But Jessica was glowing with happiness, and Brandon was attentive to her, and I told myself I was being paranoid, that I was just being an overprotective grandmother who thought no man was good enough for her granddaughter. Sarah shared my concerns, But we both decided to give Brandon the benefit of the doubt because Jessica loved him and he seemed to make her happy. And isn't that what mattered? The wedding planning started immediately, and Jessica wanted everything perfect. She'd been dreaming of her wedding day since she was a little girl, and now it was finally happening, and she was going to have the fairy tale ceremony she'd always imagined. Brandon seemed enthusiastic about the wedding, though he was oddly unavailable for many of the planning sessions, always saying he had work obligations or business trips, leaving Jessica to make most of the decisions on her own. I noticed other strange things as the months went by. Brandon never invited us to his apartment, always insisting on meeting at Jessica's place or at restaurants. When Jessica suggested meeting his friends, he'd say they were all back in California or they were busy with work. His phone rang constantly and he'd always step outside to take calls, saying it was work but seeming stressed and secretive. Once, I saw a text flash on his phone screen from someone named Amy saying, "The kids are asking when Daddy's coming home." But when I mentioned it, Brandon said it was his colleague, whose ex-husband was named Brandon too, just a mix-up in a group text. Jessica planned a beautiful wedding at our family's church, invited 200 guests, spent months picking out the perfect dress and flowers and decorations. She was so excited, counting down the days until she became Mrs. Brandon Mitchell, until she started the family she'd always dreamed of, until her fairy tale finally came true. And I wanted to be happy for her. I wanted to believe that Brandon was everything he seemed to be, but those nagging doubts kept growing in the back of my mind. Then came the rehearsal dinner, the night before the wedding, when everything fell apart in the most spectacular and devastating way possible. The wedding party had gathered at the church at 6 p.m. to practice the ceremony. Everyone was laughing and excited. Jessica was radiant in her happiness, and Brandon seemed relaxed and charming, shaking hands with groomsmen, hugging bridesmaids, playing the perfect groom-to-be. We were halfway through the rehearsal when the church doors slammed open and a woman stormed in. And the first thing I noticed was that she looked exhausted and desperate and furious all at once. She was around 30 years old, wearing jeans and a t-shirt, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she was carrying a folder full of papers. She marched down the aisle toward Brandon, and before anyone could react, she shouted those words that would change everything. "Stop this wedding. That man is already married to me. We have 2 children together, and he's been lying to all of you for the past year." The entire church went silent. Jessica started screaming, "What? No, that's not possible. Who are you?" Brandon's face went through about 5 different expressions: shock, fear, anger, calculation, and then a forced calm as he said, "I have no idea who this woman is. She's clearly mentally unstable. Someone call security." But the woman, who introduced herself as Amy Mitchell, opened her folder and started throwing papers at Brandon. Marriage certificates, birth certificates for 2 children named Ethan and Sophia Mitchell, photographs of Brandon with Amy and the kids at birthday parties and holidays and ordinary family moments. Jessica collapsed into a pew, hyperventilating, and I ran to her while Sarah confronted Brandon, demanding to know if this was true. Amy was crying now, saying, "I found out about this wedding from a credit card statement. He's been using our joint account to pay for the engagement ring and wedding expenses, draining our savings while telling me he's on work trips. I hired a private investigator and found out he's been living a double life for over a year. I didn't want to believe it, but here's all the proof." Brandon tried to leave, but Jessica's cousins, big, strong men who'd been groomsmen, blocked the doors. The minister, Reverend Thompson, who'd known our family for 30 years, said, "Son, if this woman is telling the truth, you need to come clean right now. This has gone far enough." And Brandon, realizing he was trapped, finally broke down and admitted everything.
He was married to Amy, had been for 8 years. They lived in a town 2 hours away. He had two children, Ethan, who was 6, and Sophia, who was 4. He'd never been a pharmaceutical sales rep. He was actually a used car salesman who'd been fired 6 months ago for fraud. The nice car was leased, and he was behind on payments. The expensive suits were from rental places. Everything about his life was a lie designed to make him seem more successful and stable than he really was. And why had he done this to Jessica? Because Amy had discovered he'd been cheating before and had threatened to divorce him and take the kids. And Brandon had panicked about losing his family, but also didn't want to give up his lifestyle. So he'd concocted this elaborate scheme to marry Jessica, get access to her savings and her income while keeping Amy and the kids on the side. He thought he could manage both families, keep the lies going, and no one would ever find out. Jessica was beyond devastated. She was sobbing so hard she couldn't breathe, kept saying, "This can't be real. This can't be happening. We were getting married tomorrow. I love him. This has to be a nightmare." I held her while she fell apart, while the man she trusted completely revealed himself to be a complete fraud, while her fairy tale turned into the worst kind of horror story. Amy was crying too, saying, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry to do this to you, but I had to stop this. He's my husband. Those are his children. He can't just abandon us and start a new family like we don't exist." And I looked at this woman who'd been betrayed just like Jessica had, who'd driven 2 hours with evidence to stop a wedding to a man who was supposed to be her husband. And I felt this crushing sadness for all of us, for everyone Brandon had hurt with his lies. The police were called, and they took statements from everyone. Brandon was arrested for bigamy since he'd been trying to marry Jessica while still legally married to Amy. The wedding was obviously canceled. Guests were called and told there'd been an emergency. Deposits were lost. The beautiful church ceremony Jessica had planned for months would never happen. Jessica came home with me that night because she couldn't bear to be in her apartment that was full of reminders of Brandon. She crawled into her childhood bed in my guest room, the same room she'd stayed in countless times growing up, and she cried all night long. I sat with her, held her hand, stroked her hair, and tried to find words of comfort. But what could I say? The man she loved, the man she'd planned to spend her life with, the man she trusted completely, had been a complete lie. The next morning, the day that should have been Jessica's wedding day, she woke up with swollen eyes and a broken heart and said, "Grandma, how did I not see it? How did I miss all the signs? Was I just stupid? Was I so desperate for love that I ignored every red flag?" And I told her no, she wasn't stupid. She was trusting and kind, and she'd believed the best in someone. And that wasn't a flaw, that was beautiful. But sometimes bad people exploit those qualities in good people. Over the following weeks, the full extent of Brandon's deception came out. He'd been running this con for years, had been engaged to at least 2 other women before Jessica, while staying married to Amy. He'd stolen money from previous fiancés, maxed out credit cards in their names, and moved on before they could figure out what was happening. Jessica had been lucky that Amy found out and stopped the wedding before it was too late, before Jessica became legally tied to a criminal, before she potentially had children with a man who would have eventually abandoned her and left her in debt. But Jessica didn't feel lucky. She felt humiliated and heartbroken and betrayed. She'd had to tell everyone that the wedding was canceled because her fiancé was already married. She had to return the engagement ring that turned out to be bought with Amy's money. She had to see the pity in everyone's eyes, had to endure the gossip and the questions, had to accept that she'd been conned by someone she loved. She took a leave of absence from work because she couldn't focus, couldn't stop crying, couldn't face the sympathetic looks from colleagues who'd heard what happened. She moved back in with Sarah for a while because her apartment felt too empty, too full of ghosts of the future she'd imagined with Brandon. She stopped eating, stopped sleeping, stopped doing all the things she loved. And I watched my vibrant, optimistic granddaughter turn into a shell of herself, and it broke my heart. I stayed with her as much as I could, brought her favorite foods even though she barely touched them, sat with her during the long nights when she couldn't sleep, listened to her cry and rage and question everything she thought she knew about love and trust. Sarah and I took turns making sure Jessica was never alone because we were genuinely worried about her mental state, worried about what she might do in her darkest moments. Amy reached out to Jessica a few weeks after the canceled wedding. She apologized again for the dramatic way she'd revealed the truth, but said she had no choice, that she couldn't let Brandon marry someone else when he was still her husband, when he had children who needed their father, even if their father was a liar and a cheat. Jessica was angry at first, but eventually agreed to meet with Amy, and they had a long conversation about Brandon, about all the lies he told each of them, about how he'd manipulated and used them both. That conversation was actually healing for Jessica because she realized she wasn't the only one to be fooled by Brandon, that he was a skilled con artist who deceived multiple women, that his betrayal said everything about his character and nothing about her worth. Amy told her about the signs she'd missed too, about the late-night phone calls Brandon claimed were work, about the unexplained absences, about the financial irregularities she'd ignored because she wanted to believe her husband was faithful. Brandon ended up pleading guilty to fraud and attempted bigamy and was sentenced to 3 years in prison. The judge said he was a danger to vulnerable women and needed to be stopped before he hurt anyone else. Amy filed for divorce and got full custody of the children, and Jessica started the long, difficult process of putting her life back together. It's been 8 months since the canceled wedding, and Jessica is slowly healing. She went back to work and threw herself into helping her patients, finding purpose in caring for others even while she was still wounded herself. She started seeing a therapist who's helping her work through the trauma and rebuild her ability to trust. She's reconnected with friends she'd neglected while she was focused on Brandon and wedding planning. And she's starting to laugh again, to smile again, to believe that her life isn't over just because one chapter ended in disaster. But she's changed. The innocent, trusting optimism is gone, replaced with caution and skepticism. She says she'll never date again, never trust another man, never risk her heart like that again. I tell her that's just the pain talking, that eventually she'll heal enough to try again, but she shakes her head and says, "Grandma, I gave Brandon everything, my love, my trust, my future, and it was all based on lies. How do I ever believe anyone again? How do I ever know if what someone is telling me is real?"
And I don't have good answers for her, because she's right. How do you trust again after betrayal that complete? How do you open your heart after having it so thoroughly broken? How do you believe and love again after discovering that the love you thought you had was just an elaborate con? I lie awake at night sometimes, thinking about the what ifs. What if Amy hadn't found out? What if she hadn't had the courage to drive to that church and stop the wedding? Jessica would have married Brandon, would have legally tied herself to a criminal, would have eventually discovered the truth, but only after it was too late, after they had joint accounts and maybe even children, and she was trapped in ways that would have been so much harder to escape. So in a terrible way, Amy saved Jessica. That dramatic scene at the rehearsal, as horrifying as it was, prevented something worse. But it's hard to feel grateful for that when I look at my granddaughter and see the pain in her eyes, when I see how she flinches away from kindness because she's afraid it's manipulation, when I see how she's built walls around her heart to protect herself from ever being hurt like that again. Sarah blames herself, says she should have investigated Brandon more thoroughly, should have insisted Jessica slow down, should have seen through his lies. But I tell her we all missed it. We all wanted to believe Brandon was real because Jessica was so happy, and we didn't want to be the ones to ruin that happiness. We were all fooled because Brandon was good at fooling people, because that's what con artists do.
They study people and tell them exactly what they want to hear and exploit their vulnerabilities. The wedding dress still hangs in my closet, in the garment bag, unworn and useless. Jessica can't bear to look at it, but she can't bring herself to get rid of it either. So I'm keeping it safe until she's ready to decide what to do with it. The wedding rings were returned to the jeweler. The honeymoon to Hawaii was canceled. Deposits lost. All those dreams and plans and hopes disappeared in one terrible moment when Amy walked through those church doors with the truth. I think about Brandon sometimes, sitting in his prison cell, and I wonder if he feels any remorse for the damage he's caused. Does he think about Jessica and what he put her through? Does he think about his own children and how his crimes have affected them? Does he understand that his selfish desire to maintain a lifestyle he couldn't afford and manage multiple relationships hurt real people who loved him and trusted him? But mostly I think about Jessica and how to help her heal, how to help her believe in herself again, how to help her understand that being fooled by a master manipulator doesn't mean she's weak or stupid or unworthy of love. I tell her stories about her grandfather, my late husband John, about how he was truly good and kind and honest, about how real love exists even though false love exists too. I tell her that Brandon doesn't get to be the last word on her romantic life, that his betrayal doesn't define her, that she has so much life ahead of her and so much love still to give and receive. She's starting to believe me, slowly, tentatively. Last week, she mentioned maybe joining a support group for people who've been victims of romance fraud, which is what the police called what Brandon did to her. She said it might help to talk to other people who understand what it's like to build your future on someone's lies. I told her I thought that was a great idea, that healing happens in community, that she doesn't have to carry this alone. Yesterday was the 8-month anniversary of the canceled wedding, and Jessica and I went to the cemetery where my husband, John, is buried. She laid flowers on his grave and said, "Grandpa, I wish you were here. I wish you could tell me how to trust again, how to believe in good men again when the man I chose turned out to be a monster." And I told her what John would have said, that trusting the wrong person once doesn't mean you should never trust again. It means you're human and you took a risk on love and it didn't work out. But that's what being alive is, taking risks and sometimes failing and getting back up and trying again. She cried and I cried, and we sat there in the cemetery holding each other. And I thought about how love is supposed to be the most beautiful thing in the world, but it can also be the most painful. How opening your heart to someone gives them the power to destroy you, and how that's terrifying, but also the only way to experience real connection and intimacy and joy. I don't know how this story ends. I don't know if Jessica will ever fully heal from what Brandon did to her. I don't know if she'll ever trust again, ever love again, ever believe in fairy tales again. But I know she's stronger than she thinks she is, braver than she feels, and more resilient than the trauma Brandon caused. I know she has people who love her unconditionally, who'll support her through however long it takes to recover, who'll remind her every day that she deserves better than the lies Brandon told her. And I know that somewhere out there, hopefully, there's a genuinely good man who'll see Jessica for the treasure she is, who'll earn her trust honestly, who'll give her the real love story she deserves instead of the con she got. But even if that never happens, even if Jessica decides she's done with romantic relationships, she'll still have a full and meaningful life because her worth isn't determined by whether she finds a partner. Her worth is inherent in who she is, a kind, caring, compassionate woman who deserves all the happiness in the world. If you're listening to this story and you've been through something similar, if someone you loved turned out to be lying about who they were, if your fairy tale turned into a nightmare, please know you're not alone. Romance fraud is more common than anyone wants to admit, and the victims are not stupid or naive. They're just trusting people who met skilled liars. It's not your fault. The person who lied to you made that choice, and their deception says everything about their character and nothing about yours. And if you're listening to this and you have a loved one planning to marry someone you're not sure about, please pay attention to those instincts. Ask questions, do research, look for inconsistencies. It's better to risk offending someone by investigating their past than to watch someone you love marry a con artist. We live in an age where background checks are easy, where public records are accessible, where a little bit of digging can reveal truths that lies are trying to hide. Thank you for listening to my story, to Jessica's story, to this tale of betrayal and heartbreak and the long road to healing. If this story resonated with you, if it made you think about trust and deception and the courage it takes to love despite the risk of pain, please leave a comment below sharing your thoughts or your own experiences. Subscribe to this channel to hear more real stories about the challenges families face and how we survive them. Give this video a like if you found value in it. And please, share it widely, because somewhere out there is another person being conned by someone they trust, and maybe, just maybe, this story could help them see the warning signs before it's too late. The way Amy's intervention saved Jessica from making a legal commitment to a man who was already committed to someone else. Thank you for listening to my story, to Jessica's story, to this tale of betrayal and heartbreak and the long road to healing.